The rain fell in steady sheets, drumming against the windshield of Officer Miguel's police cruiser as he adjusted his grip on the wheel. The darkened streets of the city glistened under the dim glow of flickering streetlights, giving the night an eerie, lifeless feel. His partner, Luky, sat rigidly in the passenger seat, his sharp German shepherd eyes locked onto the road ahead. Miguel glanced at him, sensing the tension in his canine partner. Luky was trained to pick up on danger before anyone else could. And the way his ears were pinned forward, the way his muscles tensed, it was enough to make Miguel uneasy. A crackle from the radio broke through the low hum of rain. Unit 12, we have reports of suspicious activity at the old warehouse on Western Drive. Possible armed individuals. Proceed with caution. Backup is en route. Miguel exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening around the wheel. Western Drive. That place was nothing but a collection of abandoned buildings, forgotten ruins of a city that had long since moved forward. Yet tonight, something was lurking in the shadows. Something bad enough for dispatch to sound different. There was an urgency in the dispatcher's voice, a subtle unease that settled like a stone in Miguel's stomach. He reached out, giving Luky a reassuring pat on the head. Just us for now, buddy. Stay sharp. Luky responded with a low, approving growl, his entire body taut and ready. As Miguel pulled onto Western Drive, the warehouse loomed ahead, a monolithic corpse of rusted steel and broken windows. The dim glow of the streetlights barely reached its decaying walls, casting long, twisted shadows across the wet pavement. Water dripped from its rusted roof in an eerie rhythm, the entire structure seemingly waiting, breathing in the night's cold air. Miguel parked a short distance away, turning off the engine to let silence settle in. He listened. No movement, no voices, just the rain. His instincts screamed at him. Something was off, too quiet. Stepping out of the cruiser, he unholstered his weapon, feeling the weight of the cold metal in his grip. Luky hopped down beside him, his ears twitching as he sniffed the damp air, his stance rigid with alertness. Then, a noise from inside. Miguel froze. Footsteps, muffled, hurried. Someone was moving inside the warehouse. He raised a fist, silently signaling Luky to halt. The rain continued to fall around them, masking the slight creak of the warehouse doors shifting in the wind. Then, before he could react, a sharp metallic clatter from within. Miguel barely had time to process the sound before it happened. A gunshot. A searing pain exploded in his side. His vision blurred, his knees buckled, as he collapsed onto the wet pavement. Luky lunged forward, his growl turning into a vicious snarl. Miguel gasped for air, barely able to whisper as the world around him spun. Luky, stay? But the loyal dog had already locked onto the threat, standing between his fallen partner and the shadows that lurked ahead. The rain hammered against the pavement as Miguel lay on the ground, his breathing ragged, his uniform stained with darkening crimson. The pain in his side was spreading, making every breath feel like fire in his lungs. He tried to move, to reach for his radio, but his strength was draining too quickly. Above him, Luky stood unmoving, a silent guardian between his fallen partner and the danger lurking in the shadows. His deep growl rolled through the damp air, a low, primal warning that sent chills through the darkness. Then, from the depths of the warehouse, figures emerged. 3 men, their faces obscured by the heavy shadows, stepped forward with slow, deliberate movements. One of them clutched a pistol, its barrel still faintly smoking from the shot that had struck Miguel. The others whispered in hushed, hurried tones, their words barely audible over the rain. We should finish him, one of them muttered, glancing nervously at Luky. Forget it, the dog's gonna tear us apart if we try. Another responded. The man with the gun took a step forward, raising the weapon slightly. Luky's growl turned into a snarl, ferocious, guttural, a sound that did not belong to a mere dog but to a creature ready to fight to the death. The men hesitated. Miguel, barely conscious, forced his lips to move. Luky, stay. But Luky did not back down. He was more than a K9 officer, he was Miguel's protector. His partner, his last line of defense against the darkness pressing in around them. The gunman cursed under his breath, his finger twitching on the trigger. He raised the weapon higher, aiming straight at Luky. That was his mistake. Luky lunged. With terrifying speed, he sprang forward, jaws snapping onto the man's wrist before he could react. The gun fired wildly into the air. The shot lost in the storm. But Luky's grip did not falter. The man screamed, trying to shake the dog off. But Luky held firm, his teeth digging deep into flesh and bone. The other two men scrambled backward, cursing as they reached for weapons. Miguel struggled to lift his head, fighting against the darkness threatening to swallow him whole. He had to help Luky, he had to, but his body wouldn't move. Then, through the pounding rain and echoing cries, another sound cut through the night. Sirens. Faint, distant, but getting closer. Luky's ears perked up for just a second, as if confirming that help was on the way, before he yanked the gunman's arm with brutal force, sending the man crashing onto the wet pavement. The gun skidded across the ground, out of reach. The other two men panicked. One turned to flee into the warehouse, disappearing into the shadows. The other hesitated, his fingers gripping the handle of a blade, torn between running and fighting. A single, furious bark from Luky made the decision for him. He turned and bolted into the night. Miguel let out a shuddering breath, relief mingling with pain. The fight wasn't over, not yet. But as Luky stood over the injured gunman, his chest heaving, his sharp eyes scanning for the next threat, Miguel knew one thing for certain. He wasn't alone, and Luky would never let him fall without a fight. The rain continued its relentless assault, the rhythmic drumming against the cold pavement nearly drowning out the sound of Miguel's ragged breathing. His uniform clung to him, wet and heavy, but the pain in his side was a far worse weight to bear. He could feel his consciousness flickering, a battle between darkness and sheer willpower. But he couldn't afford to fade now, not yet. A muffled groan pulled his focus back to the present. The gunman lay sprawled on the ground, clutching his wounded arm where Luky's powerful jaws had left deep, ragged wounds, his face twisted in agony. But the fear in his eyes was directed not at the pain, but at Luky. The German shepherd stood firm, rain-soaked and unwavering, his golden eyes locked onto the downed suspect with an intensity that left no room for doubt. Even in his weakened state, Miguel felt a surge of pride. Luky had done what he couldn't. But the danger wasn't over yet. The other two suspects had vanished into the warehouse, a labyrinth of rusted metal, abandoned machinery, and shadows deep enough to swallow a man whole. Miguel knew they wouldn't just run, they were planning something. Luky knew it too. The dog's ears twitched, his nostrils flaring as he lifted his head toward the gaping entrance of the warehouse. A low growl rumbled from his chest. There was something inside. Miguel gritted his teeth, trying to push himself up. His arms trembled under his weight, his vision swimming for a moment before he collapsed back onto the wet ground. Damn it, he was useless like this. Sirens. They were closer now, their wailing song slicing through the storm. Backup was coming. Miguel forced himself to focus. If the suspects disappeared before help arrived, they could regroup, plan another attack. They had to be stopped, now. Summoning what little strength he had left, Miguel reached for Luky. His bloodied fingers found damp fur, and the dog immediately turned to him, his body tense with restrained energy. Go, Miguel whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm. Find them. Luky didn't hesitate. With a powerful leap, he surged into the darkness of the warehouse, swallowed by the shadows. Miguel exhaled shakily, forcing himself to remain conscious. He couldn't see Luky anymore, but he could hear him, the rapid click of claws against concrete. The low, warning growls echoing through the cavernous space. Then, a scream. A crash followed, the sound of metal slamming against metal, as if something, or someone, had been thrown against a stack of crates. The frantic scuffling of boots echoed through the warehouse. Miguel could imagine it clearly. Luky was inside, hunting them down like the trained warrior he was. The gunman on the ground moaned, his head lolling to the side. Miguel ignored him. His focus was entirely on Luky. A bark, sharp, commanding, echoed from inside. Then came another scream, more desperate this time. Miguel felt the corners of his lips twitch into the faintest of smiles. Luky had found them. More sirens. Headlights sliced through the darkness, illuminating Miguel in a harsh white glow. Backup had arrived. Relief flooded through him, but it was short-lived, because deep inside the warehouse, beyond the reach of light, the real battle was still happening. And Luky was in the heart of it. Inside the warehouse, The darkness was thick, swallowing sound and sight alike. Luky moved like a phantom, his body low to the ground, his sharp nose tracking the scent of the remaining two suspects. His ears twitched, honing in on the frantic shuffling of boots against damp concrete. One of them had already fallen. Luky had taken him down swiftly, his iron grip locking onto the man's arm until he collapsed, writhing in pain. But the other suspect, the real danger, was still loose. A low growl rumbled deep in Luky's chest as he prowled forward. His movements precise, methodical. He could smell the fear, the adrenaline thick in the air. The man was close, hiding, waiting. Luky stopped suddenly. Something wasn't right. The scent, it was moving. Before Luky could react, a shadow lunged from the side. A figure burst from behind a stack of wooden crates, a metal pipe swinging downward in a blur of rusted steel. Luky dodged at the last second, the pipe smashing into the concrete with a deafening clang. Sparks flickered in the darkness. The suspect cursed under his breath, ragged, panicked. Luky didn't retreat. He let out a sharp, guttural bark, his stance lowering as his muscles tensed, ready to strike. The suspect's hand trembled as he gripped the pipe. "Stay back, you mutt," he spat, his voice laced with desperation. He knew, this wasn't an ordinary dog. But Luky wasn't trained to back down. The man made his final, desperate move. He swung again. Luky struck first. With terrifying speed, he lunged, his powerful jaws clamping onto the man's wrist before the weapon could reach him. A scream tore through the warehouse as Luky yanked, twisting his opponent's arm with brutal efficiency. The suspect collapsed, his body slamming against the cold concrete. Luky immediately released his grip, circling his prey like a predator, ensuring its victim wouldn't rise again. The man tried to crawl backward, his face contorted in pain. I give up," he gasped. His free hand rose in surrender, his eyes darting around for an escape that didn't exist. But Luky didn't move. He stood his ground, his chest heaving, waiting for his partner. Suddenly, a flood of light filled the warehouse, cutting through the thick darkness. Luky barely flinched as heavy footsteps echoed toward him. "Luky!" It was Officer Roberto. The officer moved quickly, his gun trained on the suspect, his face tight with fury. His team followed, securing the fallen criminals, their voices sharp and commanding. Roberto exhaled, lowering his weapon as he met Luky's intense gaze. Even after all these years, it still amazed him. This dog, their most loyal protector, had done it again. Roberto knelt beside Luky, pressing a firm hand to the dog's rain-slick fur. "You did good, buddy. You saved us all." Luky's tail gave a single, slow wag. The mission wasn't over yet, but his job was done. The warehouse was now flooded with flashing lights as officers secured the scene. The cold air was heavy with the scent of sweat, blood, and damp concrete. Luky remained by Roberto's side, his sharp eyes still locked on the fallen suspect, ears twitching at every distant sound. The officers were rounding up the last of the criminals when Captain David arrived, his trench coat flaring behind him as he stepped over broken crates and spent shell casings. His face was grim, his eyes sweeping over the restrained suspects with calculated precision. "Talk to me," he ordered. Roberto, still catching his breath, stood and saluted. "3 suspects in custody, sir." Luky took down the last one before he could escape. Captain David nodded, his gaze falling briefly to Luky. "Good work, both of you, but something tells me this isn't over." The words sent a chill down Roberto's spine. He glanced at the suspect Luky had taken down, the man still panting in pain, cradling his injured wrist. He was the last one standing. Or so they thought. A low beeping sound echoed from somewhere deep within the warehouse. Roberto's heart stopped. Luky's ears shot up. The German shepherd let out a sharp bark, immediately shifting into an alert stance. The sound wasn't random. It was rhythmic, calculated. "Everybody, quiet," Captain David snapped. The warehouse fell into complete silence. Beep, beep, beep. Roberto's eyes widened in horror. He had heard that sound before, a countdown. "Bomb," one of the officers shouted, confirming what Roberto already feared. Panic erupted. The officers immediately scrambled, searching the warehouse for the source. The detained suspects grinned. They had planned for this. "You really thought we'd be stupid enough to let you take us in?" the injured suspect sneered. His voice hoarse with pain but laced with satisfaction. You stopped us, but you won't stop what's coming. Roberto felt a wave of nausea rise in his throat. The explosives weren't just planted, they were already armed. Captain David moved quickly. We need to evacuate. Now. But the bomb, Roberto started. His mind racing. No time to find it. David cut in. His jaw clenched. We get out. Now. But Luky didn't move. While everyone else was retreating, Luky was sniffing the air. His body tense. His eyes flickering toward the far end of the warehouse. He was tracking something. Roberto looked at his partner. Then back at the officers who were moving toward the exit. He made a split-second decision. I'm staying, he declared. Captain David turned, furious. Roberto. No. But Roberto was already running toward Luky. His gut told him one thing: if anyone could find the bomb in time, it was Luky. And if they didn't, then this entire night was about to end in flames. Roberto's heart pounded in his chest as he sprinted toward Luky, who was already deep into the warehouse, nose low to the ground, weaving between rusted crates and broken pallets. The beeping had grown louder. The rhythmic sound echoed through the darkened space, marking every passing second like a grim countdown to disaster. Behind him, Captain David and the rest of the officers were still retreating, securing the suspects outside. But Roberto had made his choice. Find it, boy, he urged, gripping his radio with one hand while reaching for his flashlight with the other. Luky let out a sharp bark and lunged forward. His nose guided him straight toward a stack of crates near the far wall, where the shadows were thickest. Roberto followed without hesitation, his boots skidding slightly on the wet concrete. Then, he saw it. A metal case, smaller than he expected, tucked beneath the stack. The beeping was coming from inside. Luky, back, Roberto ordered, kneeling down and shining his flashlight on the device. His breath caught. It was no ordinary explosive. Several wires ran from the case to a bundle of chemical containers stacked just behind it. The setup wasn't just meant to destroy the warehouse, it was designed to create a chain reaction. An inferno that would consume the entire block. And the timer? 0 hours 1 minute and 32 seconds. A minute and a half. Roberto's throat tightened. He wasn't a bomb tech. He had no idea what to cut, what to disconnect. He grabbed his radio and pressed the button. This is Officer Roberto. I have a visual on the device. I repeat, I have eyes on the bomb. But we have less than 90 seconds. I need the bomb squad now. Static. Then Captain David's voice, sharp and urgent. There's no time. Get out of there, now. Roberto hesitated. If he left, the whole block would go up in flames. But if he stayed, Luky suddenly lunged forward. Roberto's heart nearly stopped. But Luky wasn't attacking the bomb. He was sniffing the wires. His nose darting between red, blue, and green connections. His ears flicked. His head tilting slightly before he let out a sharp, single bark, his signal. Roberto froze. Could Luky actually know? There had been stories of bomb-sniffing dogs trained to detect pressure triggers, to sense which wires carried the detonation signal. Roberto's instincts screamed at him to trust his partner. Is it this one? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper, pointing at the blue wire. Luky let out a low growl. Not that one. Roberto's pulse pounded as he reached for the red wire instead. This one? Luky barked. Once. That was it. Roberto exhaled sharply. 30 seconds. His hands were slick with sweat as he grabbed the wire cutters from his belt. Luky, if we're wrong. He didn't finish the sentence. He gritted his teeth and snipped the wire. The beeping stopped. For a second, Roberto thought his heart had too. Then, silence. No explosion. No fireball. Just the sound of his own breath and Luky licking his hand. They had done it. Over the radio, Captain David's voice crackled through. Roberto? Roberto, are you still alive? Roberto let out a shaky laugh. Yeah, Cap, he breathed, rubbing Luky's head. And I think we just saved a city block. The ringing in Roberto's ears hadn't stopped. His hands trembled as he lowered the wire cutters, his pulse still hammering from the adrenaline surge. The bomb was defused, but the weight of what had nearly happened still pressed against his chest like a vice. Luky, he whispered, his throat dry. The German shepherd pressed his nose against Roberto's hand, his tail wagging slightly as if to reassure him. The radio crackled again. Roberto, what's the situation? Captain David's voice was tight with urgency. Roberto took a deep breath and keyed his radio. The device is disarmed. We're clear. Static. Then, Jesus Christ. Stay put, we're coming in. Outside, the wail of sirens filled the air as more police units and the bomb squad finally arrived. The flashing blue and red lights reflected off the rain-slicked pavement, casting eerie patterns on the walls. Officers swarmed the warehouse, securing the suspects and sealing off the perimeter. But something wasn't right. Roberto felt it before he even turned his head. Luky had gone still again. His body tense, his ears perked forward, his nose twitching. What is it, boy? Roberto muttered, gripping Luky's harness. The dog let out a sharp whine, a sound that sent a chill down Roberto's spine. Luky wasn't reacting to the bomb. He was tracking something else. Or someone. Roberto's mind raced. They had taken down 3 suspects. But there had been whispers in the interrogation room about a 4th man. A shadow in the background. Someone pulling the strings. Luky's ears flicked toward the far end of the warehouse. And that's when Roberto saw it. A figure, barely visible in the darkness, slipping through the shattered window near the back entrance. The 4th suspect. The real mastermind. Roberto's body moved before his brain even caught up. Captain, we have a runner, he barked into his radio. Already breaking into a sprint. Luky lunged forward, leading the charge. The suspect darted through the alleyway, his footsteps splashing against the wet pavement. Roberto pushed himself harder, ignoring the fire in his lungs. His focus locked on the fleeing silhouette. But Luky was faster. With a powerful leap, the K9 closed the distance, launching himself at the suspect's legs. A scream cut through the night as the man crumpled, his body slamming onto the cold pavement. By the time Roberto reached them, Luky had him pinned. The man clawed at the ground, panting, his eyes wide with fear. Call him off, he gasped. I give up. I give up. Roberto, chest heaving, snapped the cuffs onto the man's wrists. You were gonna burn half the city. Roberto growled, tightening the restraints. You don't get to beg now. Luky let out a low growl, a final warning before stepping back. The suspect was dragged to his feet as Captain David and the rest of the officers arrived. Good work, David said, clapping Roberto on the shoulder. His gaze shifted to Luky, who stood tall despite the rain soaking his fur. Both of you. But even as the suspect was shoved into the back of a police car, Roberto couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. There had been 4 men in the plan. What if there was a 5th? The rain continued to fall in cold, steady sheets as Roberto tightened the cuffs on the 4th suspect. His heart pounded in his chest. But his instincts refused to settle. Something wasn't right. Luky's ears were still perked, his body stiff with tension. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't standing down. The K9's sharp amber eyes locked onto the warehouse entrance. Luky wasn't finished. Roberto felt it now. That same gnawing suspicion creeping up his spine. They had taken down 4 men. But the scale of this operation, the weapons cache, the explosives, the money trail, suggested a 5th player. The real mastermind. Roberto shot a look at Captain David, who was watching the suspect being shoved into the back of the cruiser. This isn't over, Roberto muttered, his voice barely above the sound of the rain. David gave him a sharp glance. You think there's someone else? I know it, Roberto said. He looked down at Luky, who let out a sharp whine, still staring at the warehouse. A 5th man, still inside, still hiding. Roberto's radio crackled. We have all 4 suspects in custody. Warehouse is secured. But it wasn't. Luky didn't trust it, and neither did Roberto. He took a step toward the open warehouse doors. Roberto, wait, David called after him, but he didn't stop. Neither did Luky. As soon as they stepped inside, the air felt wrong. The flickering lights buzzed overhead, casting distorted shadows across the empty crates and rusted metal beams. The smell of damp concrete and engine oil clung to the air. But beneath it, something else. Sweat. A human scent. Luky sniffed the air sharply, his muscles tensing. Roberto felt a chill run through him. Someone was here, watching, waiting. Then, a loud creak from above. Roberto's head snapped up just in time to see a dark figure shifting in the rafters. The 5th man. His gun was already raised. Down, Roberto shouted, diving for cover. A single gunshot rang out. echoing through the cavernous space. Luky darted forward in a blur of muscle and fur, his growl a thunderous roar in the hollow emptiness of the warehouse. The shooter barely had time to react before Luky leapt, slamming into his arm. The gun fired wildly into the ceiling as the man lost his balance. His scream cut through the air as he tumbled off the rafter, crashing through a pile of old crates. The impact left him dazed, groaning in pain. Roberto was on him in a second, kicking the gun away and shoving him onto his stomach. "You were gonna let us walk out of here?" Roberto panted, his knee digging into the man's back as he slapped the cuffs on. "You almost got away." The man let out a low laugh, blood trickling from a cut on his temple. "Almost." Roberto grabbed his collar and yanked him up, his patience wearing thin. "Who are you working for? Who else is involved?" The man only grinned, his teeth red with blood. "You have no idea," he rasped. Then he bit down, his whole body convulsed. A shuddering gasp escaped his lips, then nothing. His body went still. Roberto froze. He had seen this before. Cyanide. A fail-safe. The fifth suspect was dead. A thick silence filled the warehouse as the rain pattered outside. Roberto's grip on the man's collar tightened before he let him drop back onto the cold concrete. He exhaled shakily, running a hand down his face. Luky pressed against his side, grounding him back to reality. "You saved my ass, boy," Roberto muttered, scratching Luky's wet fur. The mastermind was gone, but his words still echoed in Roberto's mind. "You have no idea. This wasn't over. Not even close." The fifth suspect was dead, but the unease that had been clawing at Officer Roberto's gut only grew stronger. He stared at the lifeless body sprawled on the damp warehouse floor, his mind racing. The man had taken his own life, choosing cyanide over capture. That meant something. It meant they weren't just dealing with a gang. They were dealing with something bigger, something darker. Luky stood by his side, his body tense, his ears perked as he sniffed the air. The K9 still wasn't relaxing. That meant something too. The radio on Roberto's vest crackled. "Roberto, what's your status? Did you secure the last suspect?" It was Captain David's voice. Roberto clicked the button. "Suspect is down." He bit down on cyanide before we could get anything out of him. A heavy pause. "Understood. Bring his body in. We need to find out who he was." Roberto exhaled, running a hand through his damp hair. Then, a sound. Luky's head snapped up so fast that Roberto's stomach dropped. A faint click. Then another. It came from the fifth suspect's pocket. Roberto's eyes widened. He lunged forward, grabbing the dead man's jacket and shoving his hand into the pocket. His fingers closed around something hard and metallic. A detonator. His blood ran cold. The red light on the device was blinking. "Oh, shit. Luky, move," Roberto shouted, hurling himself back as fast as he could. The warehouse floor rumbled, then erupted in a violent explosion. The shockwave slammed into Roberto like a truck, launching him backward as a deafening roar filled the air. Fire and debris burst outward, lighting up the night like a hellish beacon. The blast was too close, too strong. For a split second, Roberto was convinced he was dead. Then, a sharp, wet whimper. "Luky." Roberto's vision blurred as he struggled to get up, his ears ringing, his body aching. Smoke filled the warehouse, making it impossible to see. "Luky," he shouted, his voice hoarse. No answer. Panic squeezed his throat. He forced himself to his feet, his balance unsteady. His hands shook as he reached for his flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut through the thick haze, revealing the destruction around him: burnt crates, shattered glass, twisted metal. Then, a dark shape on the ground. A motionless shape. No, 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 no. Roberto's heart slammed against his ribs as he stumbled forward, dropping to his knees beside Luky. The dog lay on his side, his fur covered in dust and debris, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. "Luky," Roberto whispered, pressing a hand to the dog's neck, feeling for his pulse. It was there, weak, but there. Relief crashed over him like a tidal wave, but it was short-lived. Luky was hurt, badly. Roberto's hands shook as he carefully scooped the K9 into his arms. Luky let out a small groan, his body limp. "Hang in there, boy, just hang in there." His radio crackled again, but he barely heard it through the pounding in his skull. Roberto, what the hell was that? Are you alright? He pressed the button, his voice raw. Warehouse was rigged. There was a bomb. Luky's down. I need medics. Now. The panic in his voice was impossible to hide. He didn't care. Nothing else mattered. Because Luky wasn't just a police dog. Luky was his partner, his family. And Roberto would be damned if he let him die tonight. Miguel sat on a bench outside the hospital, gazing up at the gray sky as a cold breeze swept through. Last night's rain had washed away the physical traces of the deadly confrontation at the shipping yard. But in his mind, everything remained vivid: the gunfire, the hurried footsteps in the shadows, and Luky's powerful barks cutting through the chaos. He took a deep breath, his fingers unconsciously tightening around the K9's collar, which he had removed when the vet checked him over. The hospital doors swung open, and Officer Roberto stepped out, his expression relieved. Miguel, Ryan's awake. The doctors say he's going to make a full recovery. A massive weight lifted from Miguel's chest. He stood up quickly and followed Roberto inside. Ryan lay on the hospital bed, still weak, but when he saw Miguel and Luky, a tired smile spread across his face. Luky immediately jumped onto the edge of the bed, nuzzling against Ryan's hand. Man, I thought I lost you, Ryan said, his voice hoarse. Not that easy. Miguel chuckled. And you better thank Luky. Ryan reached out to scratch behind the dog's ears. His eyes filled with gratitude. You're a hero, buddy. Captain David walked in soon after, his deep voice carrying authority. You all did an incredible job. Thanks to Luky and your quick thinking, we prevented a catastrophic attack. This city owes you. Miguel nodded humbly, but deep down, he understood that this wasn't just about completing a mission, it was a lesson. Courage didn't always come from holding a gun or facing danger head-on. Sometimes, it came from the unwavering trust between a man and his partner, even when that partner walked on four legs. Luky wasn't just a K9, he was family. And in that moment, Miguel knew for certain that no matter what came next, Luky would always be by his side, a loyal friend, a silent warrior, and a true hero. This story is more than just a thrilling chase or a heroic rescue. It's a testament to the power of trust, loyalty, and courage. At its core, it highlights the unbreakable bond between a police officer and his K9 partner, proving that heroes don't always wear badges or carry weapons. Sometimes, they walk on four legs, guided by pure instinct and unwavering devotion. Luky's actions throughout the mission serve as a powerful reminder that bravery isn't measured by size or strength but by the willingness to stand firm in the face of danger. Even when Miguel was injured and unable to defend himself, Luky never hesitated. His instinct to protect, his sharp intelligence, and his fearless heart were what ultimately turned the tide of the night. The story also emphasizes the importance of teamwork and trust. Miguel didn't just command Luky, he believed in him. He understood that his partner was more than just a trained police dog, he was a guardian, a friend, and a fighter. In life, whether on the streets or in our personal struggles, true partnerships are built on trust and understanding, not just obedience. Lastly, the case itself teaches us that vigilance is key. Danger often lurks where we least expect it. And staying aware, thinking ahead, and relying on those we trust can make all the difference. Without Luky's instincts and Miguel's quick thinking, the city could have faced a devastating disaster. In the end, this story isn't just about law enforcement or crime prevention, it's about the deep connections we form, the sacrifices we make, and the undeniable truth that loyalty, whether human or canine, can change the course of fate.